Hello, my name's Roger Watson and I want to add my welcome to Open Access Week for 2017. This year the theme is Open in Order To. I'm the Professor of Nursing at the University of Hull. I'm also the Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Advanced Nursing and the Editor of Nursing Open. Both these journals are published by Wiley. Today it's my work with Nursing Open that's more relevant because Nursing Open is an online, open access, pay-to-publish journal. In my role as Editor of Nursing Open, I've given a great deal of consideration to the advantages and the disadvantages of the open access movement, and I want to speak about some of these today. And specifically, I want to speak about open in order to achieve what with open access. And I'm going to look at increasing visibility, increasing impact, increasing citations, and in the UK meeting the requirements of the Research Excellence Framework. First of all, being open access in order to increase visibility. Under the traditional publishing model, where you submit a paper to a journal, it gets published, and then people have to pay to access that, either as individuals, which is actually very rare, or they access it through their institution, through some sort of library bundle that the institution pays for. Unlike that traditional model, in open access, your paper is immediately available to everyone, and they don't have to pay for it, and you also are free to distribute that paper in any way that you wish, with very few restrictions. In other words, the copyright essentially belongs to you. So if you have any worries about sharing a paper with colleagues for research purposes or with students for educational purposes, under these circumstances there are usually few restrictions on sharing papers, but nevertheless you're free to do that. But you're also free to send it to anyone you want, and you're free to put it on an online repository, which is becoming increasingly important. Another advantage, if you use social media, and I would strongly encourage you to use social media, if you use social media like Twitter or Facebook, if you put up a link to your paper and send out a tweet or a message on Facebook, then people who click on that link not only get to the details of the paper in terms of where it is and its volume and page numbers and title and so forth, they can actually access a full copy of the paper, and then they can download that and read that at their leisure. So open access definitely helps you to increase the visibility of your work. By increasing the visibility of your work, you're also more likely to increase the impact of your research. In other words, your research is more likely to be picked up by other researchers and perhaps replicated or simply cited by them or used by them to design their own studies. If your research has any implications socially or economically or educationally, then if the paper is available open access and more people get it, then it's much more likely that your work will be implemented in practice. And these days, impact of research is very important. Also, simply the fact that your work is being read by more people is kind of impact in its own in terms of influencing people and reaching people who you might not otherwise reach with your work. Many academics are interested in whether open access increases citations to your papers or not. Now, citations are very important to academics, and they're also important to journals and to publishers. Citations, as a function of the number of papers published in a journal, are used to rank journals by the impact factor, and total citations are used to rate academics, and also by calculating the itch index, which is a measure of how many papers have been cited a particular number of times, is becoming increasingly important for academics to cite in their CVs, and also for promotion and in obtaining research grants. So the question is, does open access increase citations? Well, the general consensus of opinion is that it does. The research is quite mixed. What there is good evidence for is that people tend to make their best papers available open access, and that this definitely increases the citations of those papers. However, those papers are quite likely to be cited quite well anyway, but the open access angle adds to the citations. But there are other studies which suggest, not overwhelmingly, but they do suggest that open access increases citations to your papers. So it's obviously worthwhile making your work open access. It gives it a greater chance of being cited. And even if that chance is small, then that chance is probably worth taking. Or you could simply be strategic and choose your best papers and back them and make them open access. However, there are other measures of the use of papers, and an increasingly popular one is the alt metric, essentially alternative metrics. And alternative metrics measure the mentions of your work on social media, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and electronic media, electronic newspapers, and so forth. Not all of these are ranked equally. Mentions in electronic online newspapers gain more points, for example, than a mention on LinkedIn or Twitter, but nevertheless they all accumulate to increase your alt metrics. And there's definitely evidence that open access publications get more media coverage, and the more media coverage, and all media are virtually online these days, the more media coverage a paper gets, the greater the alt metrics will be. Now, alt metrics currently don't replace citations. In some countries they're used alongside citations to measure the worth of academic work. However, it's got to be the case that alt metrics will become increasingly important in the future. The final point I want to make regarding open access in order to is in order to comply, particularly in the UK, but not only in the UK. I believe this is also the case in Australia, that where work is submitted for assessment, for example in the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, the Higher Education Funding Councils have decided that that work must be made available open access. Now, the easiest and the quickest way to make your work open access is to pay to publish it open access, either in an open access journal or in a more traditional journal, and most of them now offer open access facilities. Now, you should note, and you probably already know, that there are two routes to open access. One is the gold route and one is the green route. Essentially, the gold route is one where you pay a publisher to make your work open access. And frankly, this can be quite expensive. The other route is the green route, and the green route is free, and the green route is operated via university repositories. But the green route only allows you, normally, to put up the final accepted manuscript, and only after an embargo period, which can be 6 months or a year. You're not allowed to put up the final accepted copy. Now, in the UK, the Higher Education Funding Councils have agreed that for the purposes of the Research Excellence Framework, that the green route is adequate. So you may ask yourselves, why bother with the gold route? Well, the gold route gives much quicker access and satisfies all those requirements much more simply and much more quickly. However, I make it quite clear that green route is perfectly acceptable in the Research Excellence Framework. Nevertheless, for the other reasons that I've mentioned before, like visibility, impact, and for alt metrics, that the sooner you get your paper up online and open access, the more quickly you will accrue alt metrics, citations, visibility, and impact. So I can see many advantages to open access and being open in order to increase visibility, impact, citations, and of course alt metrics. Now, open access isn't cheap. It can cost around $3,000 to make your paper open access and available immediately for anyone to read and download. However, I wouldn't suggest that you do make every publication open access. What I'd suggest is that you're strategic about this and back your best papers and make them open access by the gold route. Of course, if you're involved in the UK Research Excellence Framework, everything you publish has to be made available open access, even if it's not being returned in the Research Excellence Framework. Universities have to have open access policies that make sure that as much of their work as possible is available open access on their repositories, but of course this is by the green route. Now, I did say that I see many advantages to open access. In fact, I see mainly advantages and very few disadvantages. However, the cost is clearly one disadvantage, and this leads people sometimes to go with the predatory publishers. And I just want to add a note here about predatory publishers. I've spoken about this before in other podcasts, and there's lots of material available on predatory publishers. Predatory publishers are not bona fide publishers. They offer very cheap online open access publication, usually because they are very poor at producing your papers, and they don't offer good editorial facilities, and they usually don't offer peer review facilities. But of course people are tempted to go with these because sometimes they offer their services for nothing. This is to entice you in to use them again, and the prices are very much lower than those for the bona fide open access journals. So please make sure that you avoid predatory publishers at all costs. One way you can check a journal, if you're in any doubt about it, is to see if it's included or not in the directory of open access journals. But there are other means of checking journals, but the main one is common sense. If you get an email asking you to publish in a journal, it's usually worth avoiding. You should take control of this and look for the journals that you want to publish in. If they're offering open access facilities very cheap, then I would also be very wary indeed. With the predatory publishers, if it looks too good to be true, it usually is. So that's my contribution to Open Access Week 2017. I hope you found that useful. You can email me on nursingopen@wiley.com if you've got any questions or comments. Do visit the Nursing Open webpage and do consider submitting your article to Nursing Open. Once again, that's my contribution to Open Access Week 2017. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.
This podcast was produced in association with youpublicationslimited.com.
do 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 do